Stand up like a soldier, baby. Yeah, I know you been like that. Gun it like a holster, baby. Show them say you're wicked like that. We live where the war is raging, chasing our crazy dreams, hoping that the bridge won't cave in. So now we'll let it all go free. Give me the thing, I make me rockin' at the dance. Give me the thing, I make me rockin' at the dance. My shit don't like steppin' at the dance. Give me the thing, I make me rock, 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 rock. Give me the thing, I make me rockin' at the dance. Give me the thing, I make me rockin' at the dance. My shit don't like steppin' at the dance. Give me the thing, I make me light it up.
Show them your flame to the fire. It's spraying like your name on a flyer. They wanna tame your desire, but you light it up, now your aim getting higher. I dey wait for Messiah, but until that day I'ma rise up high. I put my light in the air, I wanna see everywhere. One by one, let me see you. Two by two for the sequel. Three by three for my people. I know say I'm out to be next like my neighbor. Let me see you. Put your lighters on. For the sequel. Lighters on.
Light it up.
Dreams are real. light the skies up above me. A star so bright you blind me. Yeah. Don't close your eyes, don't fade away, don't fade away. Oh, yeah, you and me, we can ride on a star. If you stay with me, girl, we can rule the world. Yeah, you and me, we can light up the sky. If you stay by my side, we can rule the world. We won't break down, I will comfort you. If angels cry, oh, I'll be there for you. You've saved my soul. Don't leave me now. Don't leave me now. Oh, yeah, you and me, we can ride on a star. If you stay with me, girl, we can rule the world. Yeah, you and me, we can light up the sky. If you stay by my side, we can rule the world. All the stars are coming out tonight. They're lighting up the sky tonight for you, for you. All the stars are coming out tonight. They're lighting up the sky tonight for you, for you. If you stay with me, girl, we can rule the world.
We're taught that 1 + 1 = 2. Simple, right? But today's world isn't simple. So what happens if we look at it from a new angle? Could we make something greater? If we bring together human ingenuity, passion, and experience with the latest technology, we start to make something more, building trust for today and tomorrow. Because when a passionate community of solvers comes together, you get new solutions for a new day. That's the new equation.
Please welcome to the stage Bloomberg Live's Deputy Global Editor, Malika Kapoor.
Hello and welcome to the third and final day of Bloomberg Green here at COP. It has gone by fast. There are many familiar faces in the audience, and you know the drill. We also do have a virtual audience joining us from around the world. So I just have a couple of quick announcements that will help you get the most of your time with us. If you're joining us online and you run into any tech issues, you can try to refresh your browser, or you can use the chat box on the bottom right corner of your screen for support, and we'll get back to you. Questions, we do want you to submit questions. We want these sessions to be as interactive as possible. For those of you joining us virtually, you can click on the white tab on the right side of the video window and submit your questions. For those of you in the room, it's bgreen/live.ask. Social media, we are active there. It is #BloombergGreen, so do send us your questions. I'd like to take a moment now to acknowledge our presenting sponsor, PwC. And next, we have a message from Wes Bricker, Vice Chair, U.S. Trust Solutions co-leader at PwC.
I'm Wes Bricker, Vice Chair and co-leader of Trust Solutions at PwC. We all know that trust can take years to earn, and it can be easily lost overnight. In today's world, how a company addresses environmental, social, and governance issues, including climate change, aligned to its own purpose and values, is a key part of building trust with an organization's many stakeholders. We're at an inflection point. Net zero commitments have skyrocketed over the past few years, and this trend is expected to continue. And this is wonderful news for our environment and for communities, but so long as companies continue to see their commitments through. At PwC, within our ESG teams, we say it's time to move from theory to action. And we believe that it takes a holistic approach and a strong overall strategy to determine where an organization is headed and to identify what's needed in reporting, tax planning, operations, and technology that can deliver investment-grade metrics. To move trust forward and to do it well takes all of us, business leaders, board members, investors, regulators, policymakers, employees, consumers, communities, and other stakeholders, all of them relentlessly working together because no one group can go it alone. One thing is for certain, trust is more than just a buzzword, but by building a community focused on doing the right thing and staying attuned to the needs of all stakeholder groups, we can create lasting, sustainable impact. So I hope over the past week or so, and for the next several days, this community continues to learn, grow, share, and get together to drive meaningful change. Because together, we can all work as a community of solvers, uniting to create a transparently brighter future for generations to come. Thank you.
It's time now for our What to Watch briefings. So please join me in welcoming Bloomberg's Caroline Kan, Akshat Harati, Aaron Rutkoff, who will be in conversation with Bloomberg's John Freyer.
Good morning, and thank you all very much for joining us again here today. Good to see some perhaps slightly bleary-eyed people here after our dinner last night. But I'm delighted to introduce again one of our What to Watch panels with some of Bloomberg Green's best reporters and editors. We're going to talk you through COP so far, what are the events of the day that we're looking for, and then maybe look a little bit ahead to the next to the next few days. So Akshat, let me start with you. We got a draft, I think we're calling it a communique or a statement from the UK presidency overnight. Can you just talk us a little bit through what we saw in this draft and how those negotiations might play out over the next few days?
So it's actually 3 documents, 14 pages, 159 paragraphs. I've not been able to read all of them because they've just dropped. But we do have some highlights, and these are documents that would be essentially the consensus that comes through at the end of the meeting. These are the documents that they will be negotiating every word over. And some of these documents, I mean, these are conclusion documents. Other aspects of what is happening at COP will feed into them. So we've talked about Article 6 and the creation of a carbon market. That's a separate discussion, which will then end up as a line in the document. We've talked about discussion around adaptation and loss and damage, which will also end up in the document as a line. So now, in terms of highlight, for the first time, we have a document from the COP meeting that uses the word fossil fuels, which many of you may not have known, but the Paris Agreement doesn't mention fossil fuels because there was a lot of pressure from fossil fuel countries to not have that phrase used. And in this document, it is very clear. It says we are going to phase out the use of coal and subsidies for fossil fuels, which is a highlight. There is language to try and update NDCs, which are these nationally determined contributions that countries have to put to the UN as part of their pledge to try and reduce emissions towards the Paris goals of 2 degrees Celsius or 1.5 degrees Celsius. Typically, they were updated every 5 years. So Glasgow was the 5th year, even though it was 6th because of the pandemic, where NDCs were updated. Now they're calling for that to be updated by the end of 2022 so that there can be another stock take in 2023, and they have 1.5 degrees Celsius in there. So those were 2 big highlights that came through. There was also mention of some of the side deals. So we heard about these side deals about forests and coal and methane. The one that I could find was forests. I couldn't find coal. So there is some push to try and get that language in there in the final document. We were expecting this to come at midnight. It came at 6 a.m. So clearly they stayed up all night trying to hash out the documents.
Yes, and so please keep an eye on Bloomberg Green in the course of the day as we sort of tried to break news on where the arguments and where the fights were as that text was wrangled out. Can you talk to us a little bit, why does it matter that the NDCs get updated every year? I mean, it sort of sounds like a bureaucratic point, but why does it matter?
So we know that one of the things that is different about this energy transition, especially because of the past decade, is that technology is getting cheaper faster. And we also know that access to finance is improving because the financial industry realizes the energy transition's importance. And both those forces are going to be crucial in helping countries meet those goals. The 5-year period was decided arbitrarily that countries may be able to come through and do it, but it's clear now that if you do it more frequently, we'll have a better handle on how quickly we are going as a world. And so there's no reason, I mean, the UN has made it clear there's no reason every country can submit it as frequently as they would like. But just to be able to do a stock take and synthesize where all the countries are, it would be good to have it more frequently.
And we got a car deal or a pact or agreement again. I'm not quite sure exactly how these
yes, I think this
or how binding they are, but can you talk to us a little bit about that?
So this probably it's Transport Day today, and this is probably the last of the big side deals we are going to get. I mentioned methane, forests, and coal. And the car deal is in 2 parts. There's one from the UK about ending the sale of fossil fuel cars and vans in developed countries by 2035 and in developing countries by 2040. Some 10 countries have joined it. The largest markets, the US and China, have not. And then there's a second deal on trucks, which looks to, which is from the Netherlands, which is going to have 30% of sale of all trucks be electric by 2030, 100% sales by 2040, and no fossil fuel trucks by 2050. And some 13 countries have joined it or more. These side deals also have a number of state actors and companies joining them. So for the electric car deal, I understand Ford, GM, Daimler, BYD, Volvo are all involved. And then there are states involved as well, New York State, Washington, and California, but there are other states involved.
So overall, again, very early days, this just landed. I know you're in touch with a lot of the negotiators, with a lot of the NGOs, with a lot of the activists here in Glasgow. Can you give us, to the extent that you can so early, can you give us an overall sense of this draft statement? Does it sort of meet some of the hopes and aspirations of people pushing for tougher climate action? Is it disappointing? How would you characterize it right now?
So one of the things about this draft document and why it's being given that importance is it will change quite a bit. There will be additions and deletions, but typically the concepts or the big ideas are baked in. That's why it comes at this point. That's why there was the 6-hour negotiation after the midnight deadline. And on that, there is some happiness about fossil fuels being included. There was some pushback on financing because the numbers around financing were all in square brackets, which you're going to hear a lot about. These are undecided pieces of text within the document. And so there was a little bit of a push on finance, both for developing countries, but also for adaptation. And that, I think, will be the pushback. So we're going to see how boxing gloves come out in the next few days and who gets their way in with the document.
Great, looking forward to it. Caroline, Caroline is our Bloomberg Green reporter in Beijing. Can you talk to us a little bit? I mean, again, there was a lot of conversation, a lot of talk before coming into COP that President Xi wasn't here posing questions about China's commitment to this COP. Can you give us a sense of the Chinese position on all of these various issues over the last 10 days?
I think I met some negotiators at all kinds of events. I think they've been just like China's climate envoy has been stressing before COP and during the COP that China is a developing country. So when countries talk about the climate issues here, China requests or asks developed countries to first get the money there, right? Like that, they've been saying that this is one of the core issues that hasn't been achieved. The solution hasn't been there. So some people say right now at this stage, if this major issue is not solved, and you go to all the side deals or other topics, it's they call it a distraction. So China first stressed that it is a developing country, so it's doing its fair share of the contribution to fighting climate change. And some people in the negotiation team saying China's effort has not been fully recognized by the world. They say since last year, actually China made several big announcements, including the carbon peak emission and the carbon neutral goal. And also this year, China announced to stop building overseas coal plants. So people in China, officials, they say we have done this much, but at the same time we always just hear criticism, and this is unfair. So that is a thing I think is very clearly in China's the main their stance or the country's position.
And we had U.S. climate envoy Kerry in here yesterday talking to our editor-in-chief. He said he is up until 3 a.m. every night talking to Beijing, talking to the Chinese negotiators, trying to get them to sign up to various things, including the methane pledge. Do you see, from your conversations, do you see any sign that, or any potential that perhaps China could sign up for the methane deal, which would be a really big deal towards the end of this COP if it were to happen?
I think there are a few things, right? Like last week, I think Tuesday or Wednesday, at China's the official daily presser at Foreign Ministry, some journalists ask about this issue, is China willing to cooperate with other countries on methane? And the spokesperson said we are willing to cooperate, but again, you can expect the following line is at the same time there are so many issues in Paris Agreement that hasn't been we haven't found a solution yet. So right now we are willing to, but I think there's always it depends on what to come. And also a few days ago, some people here in the delegation said, he basically said this deal is a distraction from the main task as a COP this year. And he again said this is developed countries historical contribution to this issue again, so they need to see more commitment from developed countries.
Akshat, you wanted to get in on that, yes?
I just wanted to ask a question about, we looked at an analysis about how, if the next 30 years or 40 years of emissions are taken into consideration, that China will then become the largest historical emitter. How do you think China understands that? So right now the US is the largest historical emitter, but if business as usual stays, China will unseat the US in that position. And does that give China, I mean, it seems to me that that's the reason China shouldn't get any excuse to try and not reduce emissions.
Yeah, actually very interestingly is that, in Copenhagen, the climate talk, China's main position, in all the negotiation, the argument is China's per capita emission is so low. So if China, compared to countries like the US, China is not contributing that much, especially when you look at China's big population. But interestingly, that this year or in recent few years, China no longer say that, because as we see, China's per capita emission is rising and very fast. And I'm very interested to see if the position of the historical, as you said, this emission, this historical emission contribution will gradually get out of China's the negotiation point. So that is very interesting, but I also want to say something about domestic audience, how they talk about international climate negotiations, is that this interesting research, I don't think that is very well known in China, including the per capita emission. So people, if you ask people in China, what do you think about climate change? I would say a majority of people would still give you the two reasons, China is a country with big population and China developed so late, right? So I will be very, very happy to see more conversation, domestic conversation, getting big on climate change. But again, I think it requires a strong civil society, NGOs, and people from all levels to push the conversation to get bigger and stronger.
And speaking about the domestic audience in China, can you, obviously the UK media, the European media, the US media, a lot of attention on COP. It's been, if not front page news, then very prominently played in a lot of the media in the West. Can you talk to us a little bit about how COP is being represented in state media in China? Or would people even know it's happening?
I think people know there is a very big climate talk happening in the UK, and there's a lot of problems in the UK. I think people would stress that, oh, the COVID situation in the UK is so bad, so people must be careful. At least last week, especially the beginning 2 days with the global leaders, there were so many people at the queue, and that was definitely one of the things that got most attention in China, in Chinese media. Oh, this is so many people waiting in the queue, and you can imagine what the COVID is going to in a few weeks. And also, well, we are here talking about she's not being here and China's being a little bit quiet on stage. But in China, if you look at Chinese media, it looks like a lot of focus is on China's big contribution. You know, Xi Jinping's even the written statement, like since last year, what China has been done, rather than what are the detailed issues that hasn't been decided, or what are the difficulties at the meetings here. And yeah, I want to just tell a little bit like an anecdote in last week's press with China's climate envoy, Xie Zhenhua. And a reporter, an American reporter, asked him to, can you, is that possible, like you can maybe answer the question in English? And he said, can you ask the question in Chinese? So like this one was not really picked up among the media here. But yesterday, or maybe the day before yesterday, state media Xinhua News Agency make this a big front page story. Basically the highlight is basically Xie Zhenhua smiling and say, can you ask the question in Chinese? I think the context of this anecdote is China's increasingly seeing itself as want more position on global stage, and domestically there's a lot of this kind of content definitely got so much audience because of all the geopolitical situation of China's ever strong public voice trying to convince people, especially domestically, that China is, the new leaders in the world. So, they require some kind of change in the
there's an international perception. Yeah. And a final question, of course, this is all taking place against the backdrop of the Communist Party's plenum, which started this week. How does that play in any way into China's stance on COP? Is there any chance perhaps that after the plenum is over that we could actually see surprise announcements from China?
In the weeks before COP, experts and people close to the climate negotiation were expecting China to, of course, improve the NDC targets. And maybe one main thing is the cap emission that China hasn't announced, but a lot of people expect China to do. But maybe yes, after. The thing is, we never know when, because clearly, China doesn't want to bring that big gift to here at the meeting that the UK is hosting. But yeah, as you said, this week, interestingly, the party's sixth plenum, which is very important for the party and for Xi Jinping to, in order to secure the third term. So that is very important. That is the biggest news in China right now. So a lot of attention domestically is on this meeting rather than what is going on here in Glasgow. But yeah, so I mean, just like last year when nobody was expecting China to announce the carbon neutrality deadline, then China announced. So maybe, yeah, after this meeting, we will see something.
Good. Well, you'll let us know if you see it.
Yeah, definitely, everyone.
Aaron, you came in on Sunday, so halfway through COP. I'm sort of keen to hear from you your sort of perceptions, your sort of takeaways from COP so far, and perhaps also, and yesterday, of course, we had our Bloomberg Green Summit, so also sort of keen to hear from you what were your sort of impressions of that, what were some of the most interesting takeaways for you from the summit?
Well, coming in late means that I have an outside perspective from the first week, but also I'm better rested than Carolyn and Akshat, who've been at this for so long. You know, coming in from the outside, it really does feel like what's happening in here, the full intensity of it isn't really capable of being reflected to the outside, no matter how many stories you read, no matter how much coverage. There is like a interior space to this world as it's developing here that's just not easy to capture when you're looking at it from afar. And then at yesterday's event, I mean, I think it was super interesting, of course, to have U.S. Climate Envoy John Kerry here in the middle of the talks. I mean, you mentioned him talking about being up to 3 a.m. You can kind of hear it in his voice. I think it was particularly fascinating to watch him sort of insist on a significance in practical terms for what's been accomplished so far, even when there's, you know, someone interviewing him, like our editor-in-chief, is able to kind of puncture some of the failures or some of the disappointments. He kept facing the question as to why the U.S. hasn't joined the coal side deal, and neither has China. And he said some things that I hadn't quite heard him say so directly before, like that the U.S., even though they're not in the deal, will be coal-free in its power sector by 2030. So that was a sort of interesting way to insist on significance, even if it's not a part of the formal deal. It was really interesting to see him citing some of the research that I feel like is usually the precinct of wonkier writers like Akshat about how you can measure the impact of agreements so far in degrees of warming. I mean, that was just a really interesting way to have him talk about it in a really concrete degrees way. And I also thought it was in a way that sort of reflected the structure of our event. He talked about the need for the private sector. He talked about how there's only so far that the increase in government ambitions can go, and that the scope of the transition is going to be something that needs to have its acceleration happening in private sector. And then so at our event, there were just a lot of CEOs and business leaders who were talking about the ways that the raised ambition can come from the work that they're doing. So in a day-long discussion that sort of started with John Kerry indicating the importance of the private sector, it was really interesting to see CEOs of cosmetics companies, consumer product companies, automakers all here talking about their work and raising ambitions. And then another way that sort of thematically worked out is in the evening we had a panel with youth activists, and it was really fascinating to hear them talk about their work in terms of accelerating things and being a force that pushes for change to happen faster.
And for the rest of the week, what are you sort of most interested, most excited to see?
Well, because we've been hosting events here, I actually have to admit that I haven't crossed the line into COP myself yet. So I really want to go in and see where all of the action is happening. And then the pattern historically has been that this goes into overtime. So it's going to be an interesting process to watch unfold, the draft statement that we had today, how it gets more specific and how it changes in the kind of last mile that we're in now. And
you obviously edit the Bloomberg Green magazine, which is everyone here should pick up a copy of if you haven't already. A fantastic series of features and articles on methane and various other issues. I'm going to put you on the spot now, sort of looking ahead into 2022. What do you see as the most interesting climate themes that you want to sink your teeth into from here?
One thing that I'm really pleased to see that we've developed a framework for trying to understand. Methane has been such a big part of the discussion here today, and it's on the cover of this magazine, but I really think it's only the beginning of how we can use it as a storytelling tool. We know that there's going to be an increasing level of technological sophistication for seeing emissions as they're happening, so it makes it somewhat different than I think the framework from 6 years ago that built the Paris Agreement and sort of the way things go up to now, where we've up to now been looking at very big numbers in terms of global emissions, and now we're going to be able to do increasing work that ties emissions to the actors who are creating them. So some of the stories that we've been telling recently look at individual countries like Turkmenistan, but they also look at individual companies and their outsized emissions footprints that have up to now not been disclosed. And I think that inability for emitters to remain undisclosed in their footprint is something that's going to change. And for our work next year, I think that's going to really, when Akshat talks about how one of the pressures that's on right now is to reevaluate your NDCs each year as opposed to doing it in a 5-year window, I think that's one of the things that's going to be changing in the next, the next 6 months, the next year. We're going to be able to tell a lot of different stories that we weren't able to see before because of the technological detection change.
Yep. And we saw a great presentation yesterday from, I think it was the CEO of Planet, who sort of gave us a walkthrough of their incredible new sort of data mapping, satellite data mapping tools. And as a reminder, you can actually see all the panels, I think, on our YouTube channel and on our Bloomberg Green website if you want to go back and watch some of those. So Akshat, Aaron has called you the wonk on this panel, so I'm going to bring it back to you to talk about some of probably the wonkiest topic hanging over all of this. So we're expecting this statement, we'll see what's in it. We've had a lot of side deals. People are already, scientists are already crunching the numbers to figure out, if everyone did everything that they say they would do, this is where it leaves us in terms of degrees of warming. And the debate is quite broad, right? The sort of the fan chart of possibilities is still quite broad, and there's a heated debate getting going amongst all the climate scientists on this. Do you want to sort of walk the audience through that debate and how we should maybe think about this?
Yeah. So you all probably know about the 1.5 degrees Celsius and 2 degrees Celsius targets. Now, those are just targets, political targets. They are not scientific targets. They are not levels of warming after which suddenly something happens. Essentially, every 0.1 degree Celsius of warming makes the planet worse. And so one of the things that we learned in the IPCC report that came out in August, this 3,000-page document that scientists work on for 7 years before it's published, is that, which is there are going to be tipping points at some point. We don't know when they are, which is the reason why every 0.1 degree Celsius of warming matters. So now if we look at where we are right now, going into COP26, if we looked at all the net zero pledges that had been announced, warming was at about 2.1 degrees Celsius. And that over the period of the last 2 weeks with new net zero announcements, with new short-term goals, has fallen to 1.8 degrees Celsius. So that 0.3 degrees Celsius is quite remarkable as an achievement of progress within the 2 weeks of COP26. Now, they're all, of course, dependent on the pledges becoming reality. And we also need to realize that the 1.8 degrees Celsius is a median range. It's the median probability for what is, as you described, a fan of possible outcomes. And if we look at the fan of possible outcomes, even in the most optimistic scenario, we are at 1.5, but 3 degrees Celsius is still within sight. And it's the line that Kim Stanley Robinson, who was here at the panel, made. He said, you don't need to be in a plane crash to imagine what it would be like. And that is what 3 degrees Celsius would look like. And even in the most optimistic scenario, that still remains a possibility. And that's why there is so much push to try and cut emissions faster and deeper.
And just to sort of a layperson, are all of these scientists who are producing these models, are they all basically using the same model and the same data, or is there a lot of controversy or debate about what particular models to use?
They don't, but there is a lot of debate around modeling. And lots of scientists do their own modeling, but eventually they find ways to make it all speak together and then come to a unified conclusion around where the uncertainties lie. And that's why whenever there is an announcement around where we are headed, it's always a probabilistic range with a midpoint. And you usually read the midpoint in news stories because it's simpler to explain to the reader. And that debate is going to continue for quite some time. Computer modeling is getting really good. As we saw with satellite data, we are getting much better at being able to understand how the weather is going to play out. But we'll never be perfect because of the sheer number of variables that are included in these models and in the real world. And that's why the insurance policy of trying to ensure that the worst case scenarios are no longer in sight.
When you talk about the range of possible outcomes and kind of optimism with realism, I thought a lot about something John Kerry said at the end of his interview yesterday, where he talked about, is there a chance that the global population will, get turned off by some of the net zero politics that seem to be fixation in business leaders in a diplomatic context like this? And his insistence was that there will be millions of people in any realistic near future on the move as a result of climate change, and that will be something that brings an intensity and a focus to this, no matter what people think right now about net zero. And to see someone who was here as a statesman talking about the optimistic interpretations of what has been achieved so far and what hope to be achieved by the end of COP, also talking about the near future in those terms was something really bracing, I thought, that came out of yesterday.
Yeah, that was really quite a moment. Well, we are out of time. Thank you all so much again for your perspectives. It promises to be an exciting and interesting and long week, I think. So I can't promise that we'll have another one of these at 3 a.m. on Sunday morning when this is wrapped up, but thank you so much. This is really interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm staying on stage for our next panel, which is on the EV revolution, and our panelists will be joining us very shortly. Hi. Hi. Good morning. Thank you very much for joining us. I have we have a range of experts here from the car industry. We have Julia Pellet from ABB Formula E. We have Kristen Seaman, nice to see you again after the dinner last night from GM, and Anna Smart, Vice President of Global Public Policy at ChargePoint. So, Kristen, maybe I can start with you. I mean, this we want to talk about the EV revolution and what can governments do, what can regulators do to sort of speed this along. What are you guys hoping to see? What works and what doesn't work? But perhaps we could start with the news that we saw last night. There was a pact announced at COP from some of the major car makers, including GM, committing themselves to phasing out internal combustion engine car sales by 2040. You guys are obviously earlier than that. I also noticed that the US and China are not signatories to it, didn't sign up to it. Can you just talk, were you disappointed by that? And can you talk to us a little bit about what this agreement might mean?
Sure, yeah, no, we're very excited to partner with others in the industry, policy, to really make this transition to an all-electric future happen as quickly as possible. We've talked about it, as we made our commitments earlier this year around our carbon neutral plan and our plan to eliminate tailpipe emissions by 2035 in our light-duty vehicles. And so this is just another step of bringing people together to make that happen. We've said all along, we can't do it by ourselves, right? It's going to take public policy, it's going to take governments, it's going to take others in the industry to make that transition happen. It's going to take our partners from a charging infrastructure standpoint and utilities. And so this is a great time to see people come together and make that transition a reality.
And in terms of what you're hearing at this COP, the actions, the announcements we're seeing from governments is you're obviously clearly very, very strong, as you said, strongly behind the EV revolution. Are you hearing enough? Is there enough action here for your industry, for your business to help this along?
I think the exciting thing here at COP is you are seeing the industries come together and really make a commitment from a corporate standpoint alongside with policy. Is it enough? I don't think it's ever enough, right? I mean, we want to see things go as quickly as they can. We talk a lot about equitable climate action and making sure that we're not leaving anybody behind as this transition happens. And so we're hoping that as we come together out of this, that those things continue, those conversations continue, and we bring more sectors together to enable the infrastructure solutions and policies in order to really accelerate the movement.
And where are you seeing the most exciting and interesting developments right now in terms of the incentives, in terms of what governments are doing to incentivize the EV push?
Sure. I mean, there's obviously a lot of news in the U.S. about what's happening with the infrastructure, and the policies that are going on. There's kind of three key areas for us that we see as important. It's consumer incentives and really making that push to enable consumers and customers to see their ability to make the movement to an EV, and whether that's, it doesn't necessarily have to be a tax credit, it can be incentives, things that don't inhibit the early adopters and the first movers. The second is around infrastructure, charging infrastructure and seeing that, the ability for customers. And if you talk in the US, they need to be able to see that they can go from the east to west coast, or they can go from the north to the south and see that highway build out. The third is around R&D incentives and really encouraging the investment for companies to be able to make that commitment and really move forward. So I think things are happening. There's still a lot of work to do, and hopefully this will continue to accelerate that.
Yeah. And I'd like to bring you in. I think ChargePoint is the largest network of charging stations in Europe and the US. And we talk a lot about making electric cars and the batteries that go into them and the incentives, incentivizing people to buy them and all of this. But the question I actually get asked most when I tell people that I write and edit stories in this space is, what about the charging network? You know, I think there's a very keen awareness out there that electric cars are great, but we're not really seeing these. Sometimes I live in London, sometimes you see charging stations, a lot of the time you don't. Can you talk to us a little bit about what governments around the world are doing to help build out this charging network, and perhaps where are you seeing the most encouraging pushes for this, and where do we need to see more work from governments?
Sure. Well, I think the first part to consider is that you likely are seeing places to charge, and you just don't know it. So
right.
We're kind of transitioning from that gas station model or petrol station where you need to drive out, fuel, and then leave. With an electric vehicle, you can charge anywhere that you park. So charge at home or at work or when you're around town and shopping. And so building out the opportunities for someone to have access to charging in all those places is what we want to see government continue to support, but also private businesses that see an opportunity to provide charging for their employees or customers, or get people to shop in their store longer or visit that destination and create that seamless ecosystem. And in terms of governments, I mean, we have to talk about the US. Congress passed a big infrastructure bill last weekend, and for the United States to have an investment in infrastructure of this size, it's $5 billion, up to $7.5 billion just for passenger charging vehicles. Then there's also money for port electrification and school buses and municipal buses, and the US has really shifted in its commitments to building out that national network, and seeing that it's a global industry, of course. Other countries make similar commitments to both support the build out as well as enable investments through grants and tenders is really going to help us get there.
$5 billion on one level sounds like a lot, but I also suspect it's also not a lot. And if you think about just 2040, we're only going to be selling EVs, probably. That's a lot of cars that need to be charged. How much more money, is there like a dollar value that we can put on the amount of money that just needs to be spent on the charging infrastructure in the US?
So $5 billion is a lot compared to where we've been, but it's also just the public government commitment to each of those projects. So the funds will only cover up to 80% of the cost of a charger. With that, on top of it, you add all of the private capital committed, you add utility partnerships as well, which is more significant in the US. And then from there, we expect to see, this is just funding for highway charging. Again, when we're figuring out what this build out of charging looks like, we have to think through all of the different ways that someone could need to charge. And so $5 billion might be a place to start, but it's just a piece of that overall market that will continue to be built out through this acceleration.
And just one thing I'm curious, again, people ask me about a lot. Gas stations are a part of our lives all over the world. I don't know how many there are, but there must be hundreds of millions of them. When you look at a charging future, do you imagine how many of those, how disruptive is the EV revolution going to be to this multi-billion-dollar industry? And if you look 20 years into the future, will all of these gas stations ultimately turn into charging points, and how many of them will survive? I mean, it's a very, very hard question to answer, I know, but how should we think about the gas station? You guys are the ultimate disruptors of the gas station model. So how do you see that change?
And gas stations are actually a great partner for us as well. People built gas stations where it was convenient for fueling. So they're great locations for putting that highway charger that someone might need to drive between communities or take that road trip. And we're finding good partnerships with Fueling and Convenience where they have an interest in providing whatever fueling is necessary, and have people, stop in and shop in that store while they're waiting for their vehicle to fuel. So I think we'll continue to see that network, but we also expect to see charge points and charging stations at every other type of place someone could park. Because again, you're more likely to see charging look like how you would charge your phone right now. If you all had chargers at your tables, you'd probably plug in just because you can and you want to top off and make sure that you've got the ability to use your phone 3 hours from now. The same way with electric vehicles, it'll be seamless. You will find that you plug in when you get into work, or that when you went shopping, or while you were eating at a restaurant downtown, continue to top off throughout that day. And that's what we see as now is what the ecosystem's growing into.
And the charging cables will be too big to lose, hopefully. I spend most of my life, but when I travel, buying cables for my phone.
They're waiting for you.
So Julia, do you want to talk to us a little bit about how Formula E fits into all of this? So we've heard from a big car maker, from a big charging company. You guys are very, very different business model. What are you looking for from governments to help expand your part of the electric car universe?
So basically, we are at the interface of these industries because and I'm very much echoing what my colleagues just say, we are here to help break EV barriers to adoption for the consumer perspective. And we have 3 key battles: technology, and we use the championship as a technological laboratory to advance the technology because car makers are coming in and they are testing, developing their technologies and then transferring into the road cars that you and I tomorrow will be buying and driving. The perception, because we needed to really kind of like, in a way, refresh the perception of electric vehicles. If you consider that Formula E was created more or less 10 years ago, 10 years ago, the image of electric vehicles was not exactly the most exciting thing, whereas now the cars you see on the streets and also kind of like the range of options is absolutely fantastic. So people kind of like really get attracted and captivated by the fact that they can drive an EV that is really looking good, really cool. And then, very importantly, infrastructure, because infrastructure is kind of like the one thing that will enable us to make it a mass market reality, because we need people to be able to charge. And this needs to be handy, this needs to be kind of like close by home, work, and kind of like very easy to identify and to find, and it needs to be quick. And one of the things that we do within the championship is that we always try and give an answer to the next technological issue that is going to be associated to this EV revolution. We started with the battery, the range anxiety of the drivers, because we knew that people were worried about not being able to do a full trip to go on holidays and so on. We doubled the battery capacity of the cars in just 4 years. Now we're looking at fast charging, ultra fast charging, and that's
how fast is ultra fast?
Couple of seconds.
Seconds, right? Okay.
Yes.
It's a lot of charge.
Yeah. It's very intense in terms of energy demand, but that's what people want. You want to have kind of like just a quick, fast charge and then go back.
And can you talk a little bit about the EU, Europe versus the US? Where are you seeing the most help coming from governments? You know, is one of them better than the other? What would you like to see more of?
Well, I mean, we really operate globally, so there are definitely kind of like strengths in Europe and strengths in the US. What we see really kind of like on a global outlook and global point of view is that we are kind of like in a moment where governments have understood that EV revolution is not an option. This is the main way forward. And you see these governments taking commitments to stop the sale of what we call ICE, internal combustion engines. And that's, I mean, obviously kind of like a fantastic sign in the sense that we know we have 9 years to cut down emissions globally by 45 or 50%. And electric vehicles is a huge part of the solution because it's a huge part of the problem. Transport accounts for at least a third of the global emissions. And we know it's mainly due to internal combustion engines.
And in terms of consumer demand for your products, where are you seeing the most interest? What kind of products, what geographical areas?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, we are a sort of interface because we are showcasing the cars that you won't be driving yourself. I mean, although you can be very lucky and do a lap in our car, but it's not exactly what the everyday consumer is going to drive. But we're showcasing the technology that will be transferred into their car in a very short time frame, like we're talking 3-4 years max. So, I mean, we have already some models that are using the technology that was developed in the garage just a couple of seasons ago. So it's very much about, again, using the power of sport to captivate the heart, the mind, and the souls of these people so that they see these cars on their streets, because that's one of the uniqueness of Formula E. We race always inner city centers, and people see these electric vehicles that are ultra fast, really looking good, like really sexy cars. And they're like, well, why not me then? I mean, we have the biggest lineup of car manufacturers in all the global championships. So you have many, many options to go in a shop and buy an electric vehicle that you've probably been, racing under the flag of the racing team in the championship.
And Formula E, of course, is all about entertainment as well. Can you give us a sense of, in terms of audience and sponsorship, etc., how does the size of that market now, EV races, how does that compare against regular Formula One?
Well, so
how do you see that audience growing over time?
I mean, the audience is constantly growing, so does the sponsorship and the lineup of the teams and the manufacturers. What is very important to us is that we're targeting like the Gen Z audience, so really the young generation, the young people that are going to be impacted by climate change and do demand not only entertainment with a purpose, but do demand like real, clear solutions to live sustainable lifestyles. And again, that's what we are here for. We are showcasing that the future is going to be electric and that you'll have many options to live this sustainable lifestyle. And what is also interesting is that we see that we're really attracting a pool of sponsors and partners that do want to come up in the championship to showcase the innovation that they are themselves creating in their own verticals and industries. So, I mean, I'm taking a couple of examples. We work, with Heineken that developed recently their Greener Bar, and the Greener Bar is an innovation where it's the first time that a bar has been conceived with the principles of circular economy. And that matters because they've been developing that in our platform together with some of our other partners and ourselves. And they're going to be implementing that and scaling that up in the rest of their industry, in the rest of their activation. So that's how you raise the standard, but also you showcase that Formula E is here to test not only the technology of the cars, it's to test the technologies around how to live more sustainable lifestyles. And then not only raise the bar in the different industry and showcase their leadership, but again, showcase to the consumers that, we are here to provide solutions. Because what is very important through the entertainment is that we don't want to be doom and gloom. We want to show that the future is going to be extremely exciting, that the future is going to be sustainable, but it's not going to feel less, it's actually more.
How fast can the fastest Formula E car go?
Well, we can go up to 250 kilometers per hour, but we could...
And how does that compare against a regular Formula One?
That's less, but the cars are restricted in terms of speed, so we could go faster because we're racing city centers. So the way we are designing our tracks intends that, we can't go as fast because that would be literally too dangerous for the drivers.
Yes.
And I won't quote any team, but once a team principal told me that the drivers don't wanted the car faster, so...
They did not want it faster?
No, because they were already a lot.
Pushing the limits.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry to take the conversation from sexy, fast cars back to the dreary topic of infrastructure and infrastructure spending. But Kristen, perhaps you could tell us a little bit about, for an audience here, this is an international audience, for people who aren't perhaps very familiar with the nuts and bolts of the infrastructure bill and what other things that Biden is trying to do. Can you tell us a little bit about what was in the infrastructure bill for the EV universe? We heard a little bit about the charging aspect of it, and what you hope to get from the rest of Biden's climate agenda.
Yeah, obviously there's lots of things in there to make sure that we continue to make this movement reality for the U.S., right? And the corporates and the partnerships working together on that. I'm not an expert on everything that was actually made it and didn't make it. But I think what's important is we talk about, it really just accelerates that transition, and where, charging is going to be a reality for all of us going forward. I loved what you talked about with, where people go to charge, because one of the things that we're doing too is working with our dealerships our dealerships are our front line, and a lot of what's happening from a policy standpoint is making sure that as this transition occurs, people don't get left behind, whether it be, a lot of discussion around our union workers and the incentives around manufacturing that takes place in the U.S. is one of the things that's really getting pushed. And as we work with our dealers, another big important piece for us is having them help us understand where charging is important. They're the front line to the customer. And the customer, and they know in their community where charging stations are going to be valuable, whether it's a local community center, the high school football field, where the community goes. Over 90% of the population in the U.S. is less than 10 miles away from a GM dealership. And so to have that connection point and really be able to see how it's a reality in their lifestyle helps that transition.
And do you have any closing thoughts on how government and regulators can help you?
Yeah, following up on what's also missing from the infrastructure bill is the incentives for the vehicles. And when we're thinking about this whole system, we need to make sure that we're both incentivizing and making possible for everyone to get behind the wheel of an electric vehicle or ride in an electric vehicle or work with an electric vehicle, and then at the same time incentivize the build out of the infrastructure. You don't want someone to go skydiving and not give them a parachute at the same time. We need to work hand in hand on building out the charging points as well as make sure that there's all the great vehicle options on the table. So in the US, Congress is significantly looking at how do we separately in different legislation incentivize more vehicles, but globally seeing announcements this week and hearing more commitments to creating those zero emission vehicle goals or mandates that help send the right signals that it's time to develop new models of EVs, consider we want people to have options. So when you're going to buy an electric car, it's not that you picked the one that was electric versus the other. It's, okay, you wanted an all-wheel drive vehicle or you needed that minivan to enable you to take your family places. Well, now there's an electric option. Yeah. So seeing those policies go hand in hand is really what we hope to cut out of this week.
Well, we are out of time, but before I go, I did want to draw all of your attention as well to our Hyperdrive news vertical. So this is part of Bloomberg Green, and it's our look at the future of electric cars. I think there should be the front page of the website up on the screen there. It's also a daily newsletter, which I would urge you all to sign up for. We think it's the best in the business, and it tackles all of these different issues from our reporters all over the world about the EV revolution. So please sign up, and with that advertisement for our newsletter. Thank you all very much for joining us so early today. It was a really interesting conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye. And I think we're wrapped up now, right? Yes. This is a wrap, yeah. Okay.
And that's it, and that's a wrap for Bloomberg Green at COP. I'd like to thank our presenting sponsor, PwC. I'd like to thank all our speakers and moderators and the excellent editorial team at Bloomberg Green for their time and their insight. Most of all, I'd like to thank you, our audience here in the room, and those of you who've joined us virtually. Thank you for being with us. I'm Malika Kapoor, and from all of us at Bloomberg and Bloomberg Live, thank you for being with us.